Fellow Rotarians and guests, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Andy Friedenberg. Many of you here already know Andy from the Cinema Society of San Diego and also from our own Coronado Island Film Festival, which he helped us launch in 2016 and stayed with us all the way until COVID hit us into 2020. He has been well known in San Diego since the 1980s as the movie guy, the man who knows everything about movies. His energy and his love of movies is contagious, and nobody can introduce a movie like Andy can. I called Andy back in 2012 and said, Andy, can you meet me at Cafe 1134? I really need your advice on something. When he got there, I asked him if he thought Coronado would be right for a film festival. And I got a resounding yes, and I want to be involved. And he was, and oh, what a ride we had. Sometimes bumpy. Chris Grant's here, she'll tell you, but always interesting and always fun. In fact, Mayor Casey Tanaka at one point dubbed Andy an honorary Coronado citizen, which we still are holding you to that. And we got to know Andy's beautiful Beth, the other love of his life. She's here too, sitting right next to him. Of all the things Andy did to help us shape our festival, I think the most amazing was bringing his good friend to us, the legendary movie critic and film historian Leonard Maltin, with his wonderful wife, Alice. Leonard is another guy whose love and knowledge of movies and those who make them is staggering. We're indebted to you forever for Leonard and Alice, Andy. This is Andy's book. He's going to talk about it today. It's called Celebrity War Stories, Confessions of a Movie Studio Publicist. It's a fun read with lots of pictures of celebrities, and pictures of Andy with hair on his face and on his head. You can get it on Amazon. I think it's 15 or 16 bucks. And he's going to talk about it. I just want to read a couple of things from it. The first is, first page, Praise for Celebrity War Stories by legendary film critic and film historian Leonard Maltin. Quote, Andrew Friedenberg takes us back to a time when an ambitious young guy with imagination could find a place for himself in the thick of the movie business. I had fun reading about his adventures in movie promotion. The next is his dedication. For my love, Beth, you have been the life balance I have dreamt of since diving into this surreal, unbalanced world, making this very happy man complete. Andrew Friedenberg, February 2021. And so I want to introduce you to this honorary Coronado citizen, Andy Friedenberg.
When I grow up, I want to be Doug St. Dennis. She is truly the poster child for living life to its fullest. And I'm proud to call her my friend, and I am very grateful that she invited me to be part of the team to launch her vision for a Coronado Island Film Festival. I have many wonderful thoughts, two in particular, at that time, for that time. First off, I got to work with some amazing people from this community, amazing, some of which are here today. They were so nice and making me an honorary Coronado, and I'll never forget that. I take that very seriously. The other is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a film festival from the ground up. Yes, it was Doug's vision, but we had no rules. We had no regulations. We had no precedent. We had no guru up there saying, you can't do that, or you can do that. I'll allow you to do that. We gathered together in unison to create a world-class event for a world-class community. And I'll never forget the day it was born. I was so excited, as were all of us, to see our work come to fruition, and I got to see our child grow for the first 4 years. And I congratulate the festival for carrying on with our child, who's growing up and continuing on the foundation that we started. Of course, everything stopped when the pandemic hit, and that included my involvement with the festival and my involvement with the Cinema Society of San Diego, which I started in 1983. It's a cultural arts organization that premieres films on a monthly basis. You subscribe, like the Opera Symphony. That stopped, but I must say that this fall, we not only were back in action, but we'll celebrate our 40th season as the longest-running cinema organization in San Diego County. And also what stopped were the arts tours that that Beth and I put together, she's a travel agent, put together for arts lovers around the world. All of that stopped. And about halfway through the pandemic, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who's in the industry, film industry, living in Santa Monica, and he said, Andy, I've been thinking about you and Beth. I said, why's that? He said, because they say that the 3 worst businesses you can be in during the pandemic are movies, travel, and restaurants. And Andy, you got 2 out of 3. I said, well, thank you. Thank you so much. So I wrote this book called, as Doug said, called Celebrity War Stories, Confessions of a Movie Studio Publicist. And basically, it was about my experiences as a regional marketing director from 1978 to 1983, working for United Artists, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Columbia Pictures as a regional marketing director, first based in Denver for the Rocky Mountain region, then got promoted to Dallas for the Southwest region, and then promoted to Chicago for the Midwest region. Well, why write a book? Well, to be honest with you, writing a book was not on my radar screen. I had no interest or no thoughts about writing a book, but a couple things prompted me to do so. First, I had a lot of time on my hands. And second of all, Beth and I, right before the pandemic, were on a cruise ship, and we were having dinner in the dining room, and we were sitting there by ourselves, having a lovely dinner, when a man walked up to me, up to us, and looked down at me and said, "Is it true?" I said, "Is what true?" He said, "You worked for a film studio?" I said, "Yes, I've worked for film studios." "Did you ever work with celebrities?" "Yes, I worked with a lot of celebrities." "Do you have any stories?" "Yeah, I have a lot of stories." "Well, can I hear them?" I said, "You want to hear my stories?" He goes, "Yeah, if you don't mind." I said, "Okay." And just as I said, "Okay," the entire dining room section where we were at pulled their chairs to my table. And I thought to myself, maybe I've got something here. So during the pandemic, now I have a friend whose daughter published wrote her first novel. It took her 5 years to write her book. This took me 8 days. 8 days, because it just flowed. I knew it all, I lived it all, but it took me about 6 months to edit it, collecting I saved everything from those days, and it took about 6 months with grammar and punctuation and the photos and what have you. And then I called, as you heard about Leonard Maltin, I called my dear friend Leonard, and I said, "Leonard, I've got this book, who should I go to publish it?" And he said, "Self-publish it on Amazon." I said, "Okay." So I went through Amazon, it got published, and about a month later, my phone rang. And a woman on the other end said, "Is this Andy?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm calling you from Fort Lauderdale, Florida." I said, "Oh, I went to high school in Fort Lauderdale." "Hi." She said, "I heard about your book." I said, "Okay." She said, "How would you like to lecture on your book on cruise ships?" I said, "I'm your guy." The next thing you know, Beth and I are traveling the world talking movies. We did, last summer, we were all around Ireland. Last December, I was talking about my book to 200 passengers and a lot of penguins in Antarctica. Next month, we go Fort Lauderdale to Amsterdam. In 2 months, we're on the Queen Mary 2 from New York to London. And in September, we're doing round-trip Athens, including Israel, Egypt, and Turkey. So it's a great gig. Whenever I'm at dinner and somebody sits next to me and we start talking, I tell them, "Oh, I'm the guest lecturer on the ship." To which they always say, "You mean you work on this ship?" I'm like, "No, I don't work on this ship. This isn't work. I talk movies." That's really great. But I want to tell you an experience that I had, that Beth and I had on a ship. It was on a celebrity ship, one of their 3 new $2.2 billion ships. This was called the Apex, also the Edge, and the Beyond. Has anybody been on any of those ships? They are, just to see a $2.2 billion ship is worth your time. Anyways, this was to the Caribbean. And what it was to 1 week to the Eastern Caribbean. But what cruise ships like to do, if you're a lecturer, is they say, "Well, could you do 2 back-to-back?" Because they don't want to fly someone in, fly back, and fly again. So they say, "Would you like to stay and do back-to-back?" I'm like, "Sure, I'm your guy. Yeah, that's great." So 1 week was the Eastern Caribbean. The next week was the Western Caribbean. So the first week, they put us in a gorgeous cabin on the 7th floor with an infinity balcony, which is fantastic. Beautiful cabin on the 7th floor. And they put my lectures in the main theater, where the singers and dancers perform, with a huge curved screen. It was gorgeous. And they put my lectures on the days at sea at the best time you can have a talk. Do you know what time that is? 11 a.m. And you know why? Because the buffet opens at 12. So that is the ideal time for a talk. And it was going well. Until the end of the first week, we got a note in our cabin from the cruise director saying, "Mr. Friedenberg, we want to let you know that for the second week, we are going to have a second lecture on board. And we want to let you know that we're moving your cabin from the 7th floor to the 3rd floor, where there is no balcony. It's just a window. And we are moving your talk from the main theater to a nightclub. And we're moving your talk from 11 a.m. to 9 a.m. Well, my first thought was, did I do something wrong? And then my second thought was, who the heck is coming? It turned out it was a man named Jim Kennedy. And Jim, for years, ran the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And so he was going to talk about space shuttles and astronauts and things like that. So we made the move, and the second week started. And I gave my first talk at 9 in the morning about my work with Dustin Hoffman and writer-director Robert Benton and their Oscar-winning film, Kramer versus Kramer. And we had about 100 people in the club. And when it was over, they broke out in applause, which was very nice. Broke out in applause. And I said, "Okay, this is good." And then a gentleman ran over to me at the podium and said, "That was great." I said, "Well, thank you, sir." He goes, No, that was really great." I said, "Thank you so much." He goes, "I'm Jim Kennedy." I really wanted to say, "How's our cabin?" But instead, I was very diplomatic and said, Beth and I are going to be, my wife and I are going to be hearing you at 11 a.m. in the theater. And he said, okay. So we go there at 11 a.m. and it was packed because it's astronauts and space shuttles. He stood up and said, I am so happy to be on this gorgeous ship, talking about what I love with the Kennedy Space Center and all that. But before I begin, he says, I just want all of you to know that I am not the only lecturer on this ship. I attended Andy's cinema talk this morning, and it was so great you all need to go. Now, wasn't that nice? I thought that was really sweet. I went up to him and I said, I never thought I had a press agent on the ship, but thank you, Jim. He said, I'm going to tell top brass about you. I said, you do that. That would be awesome. Well, do I have time to tell you about one celebrity war story? Yeah. We okay on time? So, do you remember the actor Charlton Heston? Okay, so I want to tell you Charlton Heston stories as long as I can. So here's one of my war stories. So I was with Columbia Pictures in Dallas when I got a phone call from my boss's boss that we were releasing a Charlton Heston, Brian Keith Western called The Mountain Men. Did anybody see it? Not a very good movie. I was to handle the world premiere, which was going to take place in the southern tip of Colorado, just before the New Mexico border in a community called Walsenburg, population 5,000, about 30 miles south of Pueblo, Colorado. And the reason why the world premiere was going to take place in Walsenburg is because every year there were a group of people that would gather together in Walsenburg for a period of time to reenact what it was like to be mountaineers in the 1800s. Because the film dealt with mountaineers looking for beaver for their traps and running into Indians, and that's what the film was about. So my job was to work with these mountaineers because we were inviting press from all over the country to come to this, to the mountains, to stay in plush tents and learn about living in the mountains, survival skills, what have you. And then my job also was to set up an outdoor theater for the world premiere Under the Moon and Stars. So I hired a company out of Denver for the world premiere equipment and told them where I wanted it to go. And then I flew in early and met with these mountaineers. And anyways, the big weekend happened, and they flew in from all over the country, these press people. We had very nice tents, a little cool in the mountains, but a very, very nice tents. And we got to learn survival skills and what have you. Anyways, comes the big event. We're sitting around the campfire, and the mountaineers present Mr. Heston and his son Fraser, who wrote the screenplay, Golden Tomahawks, which was very nice. And then it was time to gather up your blankets and belongings and walk a short distance to where I had this outdoor movie theater ready to go with comfortable plush chairs. As they got up and started to walk this little path, the temperature started dropping, and the winds started gusting, and the dust from the ground started whirling. And by the time they got to this beautiful outdoor theater, something happened that none of us had expected. The movie screen ripped in half. And it was at that moment that I remember thinking, what other career should I consider? Because I am history. And upon looking at that broken, ripped screen, Mr. Heston shouted out, Andy, get me the microphone now. Well, who am I to say no to Moses? So I grabbed the microphone, I ran it over to him, he was standing in front of the ripped screen, and then he spoke and said, ladies and gentlemen, I wish I had the rod that I used to part the Red Sea right now. And that was it. Nobody got to see the movie. They all went back and they wrote all about it. It was a huge publicity hit. to the point where my bosses at Columbia Pictures called to congratulate me on the success of the world premiere that never happened. I mean, this is insanity. And to finish off this wild weekend, it was time, the weekend was over, it was time to take them to the little airport in Pueblo for the once-a-day flight to Denver, and from Denver they switched planes and they were going home to Los Angeles. Well, I make sure in this little airport that the Hestons were comfortable, and all of a sudden on the public address system, the representative for the airline announced that the one flight a day to Denver that day has now been canceled. And it will happen the next day. So that caused, as you can imagine, an outrage. These people on this flight ran up to this poor guy, screaming at him, why is this happening? Where should I stay? And whatever. But actually, for a guy who worries about everything, I was pretty okay about this whole thing, because I went up to the airline representative. I said, excuse me, what is your name? He said, Michael. Michael, I have a guest that was scheduled for that plane, and he'd like to talk to you. He goes, sure, I'm happy to explain it all. I said, oh, sure, follow me. The look on this guy's face, he said, oh my God, that's Charlton Heston. I said, yes, it is. And Mr. Heston, this is Michael from the airline, and he's going to help us get us another plane for you. And Mr. Heston, in his voice, said, thank you, Michael, I appreciate it. And this kid runs back to his dad, to the counter, gets on the phone, and as fast as you could say, let my people go, a plane pulled up to take us to Denver. So that's my Charlton Heston experience. How am I on time?
You can do another one.
I can do another one. Wow. I thought I had time for just one. Oh, gosh, where should I start? Okay. I'll tell you about Dustin Hoffman. So really, the story of Dustin Hoffman with Kramer versus Kramer in Dallas is really the story of my limousine driver, Jack Hicks, who stood 6'4" tall before he put on his boots and talked like this and was just a sweetheart of a guy. And Jack's claim to fame was he drove a congressman in the motorcade when President Kennedy was assassinated. And so Jack, when I would have a celebrity in town, Jack would take them in his limo, stop his limo right at the spot where President Kennedy was assassinated, and do the whole story. And it was very good. Anyway, so I had Dustin in town with Kramer versus Kramer, and the night the press were seeing the movie, I walked by the restaurant, and there was Dustin and our writer-director, Robert Benton. They were sitting at a table, so I went over to say hello, and Dustin Hoffman said, why don't you join us for dinner? Well, who am I to say no to Rain Man? So we sat down, and Dustin, I've worked with him a few times. He's very absorbed with his characters, but that night, he wanted to know all about Dallas. And I told him that the driver who drove him from the airport to the Fairmont Hotel and I told him about Jack Hicks, and he said, oh, I would love to do that tour. I said, well, it's probably not going to happen because your schedule is so busy. And so he did the print interviews, and then he did the TV and radio interviews. And his last interview was for a TV show called PM Magazine. And it was clear that he and the host of that TV show were not getting along. Something about she didn't have her facts right. Anyways, he had enough, and he said, I'm out of here. And he stormed out of the interview, looked at our driver, and said, Jack, let's get out of here. And he did the tour. He left, and I started praying that, oh my gosh, I hope it goes well, because if not, I'm going to hear about it from my top brass. And when Jack came back with Dustin, Jack said to me, yes, we did the tour, and he asked a lot of questions. So it was time, the weekend ended, it was time to go back to the airport. So I was in a limo with with Robert Benton, and Jack was in the, Dustin was in the limo with Jack. And we get to the airport, and they board the plane, and then Dustin jumps up out of his first class seat and says, "I forgot to say goodbye to Jack." Well, Dustin is about 5'6", and Jack, as I said, was about 6'4". And so Dustin runs off the plane, leaps into the arms of this gentle giant, and Jack turns all red in the face and says, "Mr. Hoffman, I've been a big fan of yours ever since The Godfather." Thank God Dustin laughed and boarded the plane again. I didn't think it was funny at all and said, "Jack, Dustin Hoffman wasn't in The Godfather. That was Al Pacino." And he said, "Well, Andy, I'm so sorry. And we laughed it off. And that was that war story. How are we on time?
Well, good. We could do question and answer.
Sure, let's do question and answer.
So if we can get the microphone, does anybody have any questions at all for Andy? I know we're not shy, so.
Can you tell us, if you're comfortable with it, who the most challenging people to work with was?
You mean you want the dirt? I don't do dirt. I'm sorry. Whenever I talk on a cruise ship, they say, "Who was really difficult?" I just don't want to go there. It's not in my book. I choose not to. All these people I have respect for, and even though the situations were funky, we got through it, and so I'm sorry.
Who was the most enjoyable to work with?
So I was 23 when I started in the motion picture business. I'm 68 now. And when I was told, for the first world premiere I ever did was a film called Convoy. It was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I was told part of my job was to pick up Ernest Borgnine. Do you remember the actor Ernest Borgnine? He won the Oscar in 1955 for the film Marty. And I met him, and he was excited to be there for Convoy with Chris Christopherson and Ally McGraw. And we went outside to wait for the limousine to pick us up. And I said to him, "Mr. Borgnine, it's a great honor to meet you." And he said, "Ernie, call me Ernie." And I'll never forget that as long as I live. Here, I'm a 23-year-old nothing, and here's an Oscar winner being so nice. So kind of nice. We have another?
Did you ever hear from Mr. Kennedy's top brass?
Well, I keep going on Celebrity, so I guess that's a good sign. And they write very nice notes about me. The cruise directors and activities director write nice notes that everybody likes Beth and Andy and keep doing it, so that's very nice.
Thank you so much. This is really exciting. I'd like to be at a dinner party with you. What fun. Oh my gosh. What an amazing career and life you've had. It's just so much fun to hear those stories. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So thanks so much, and maybe we'll see you on a cruise ship.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. And if you need a travel agent, here she is. Another question?
Any other questions?
No?
Okay.
Well, then thank you so much for having me. And thank you again, Doug, for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy.